Imagine a society that is just so obsessed with artistic ambition and so desperate to create the ultimate theatrical spectacle that parents would willingly castrate their musically talented sons.
Yeah, just to guarantee them a shot at becoming international superstars.
Right. I mean, it sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, honestly, but that is the sheer, terrifying, boundary-pushing reality of the Baroque era.
It really shatters that persistent illusion we have of classical history, doesn't it? We tend to picture the period from, roughly 1600 to 1750 as this dusty museum exhibit behind thick glass.
Like powdered wigs and velvet coats.
Exactly. And people just politely following rules that were handed down on stone tablets.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the Baroque period was a violent rupture from everything that came before it.
Oh, totally.
It was an artistic Wild West, really, driven by scientific discovery, expanding global trade, and massive religious upheaval.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking your source material, a stack of essential works designed to help you master this era, whether that's for, say, an RCM Grade 10 history exam, or maybe you're just here out of sheer curiosity.
But we are leaving the flashcards behind.
Yes, exactly. We aren't here to memorize a dictionary of musical vocabulary. Our mission today is to uncover the fascinating, often desperate questions these composers were trying to answer.
Because treating these pieces as isolated examples on a syllabus completely misses the story.
Right. We're going to experience the mechanics of the music first, to understand why it sounds the way it does, before we even try to give it a name.
I love that approach. The composers of this era were in constant dialogue and often fierce competition with one another. They were wrestling with the limits of human expression across theaters, royal courts, private salons, and churches.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the first massive shift in musical history. The late Renaissance gave us some incredibly beautiful vocal music, but it had a fatal flaw when it came to telling a story, didn't it?
It really did. So the prevailing style before the Baroque was polyphony. You had multiple, highly independent vocal lines weaving together simultaneously.
Which sounds gorgeous acoustically.
Oh, it's stunning.
Yeah.
But if you are an audience member trying to follow a narrative, it is an absolute nightmare. The text gets completely obliterated in the overlapping melodies.
I mean, if four people are singing four different sentences at completely different times, the human brain just cannot process the narrative.
Exactly.
So Renaissance polyphony was basically like five people talking over each other at a dinner party. Like they're all making brilliant points, but nobody can actually understand the story being told.
That's a great way to put it.
And this group of thinkers in Italy, the Florentine Camerata, essentially said, wait, give the microphone to just one person so we can actually hear what happened.
What's fascinating here is that the Camerata realized that to move an audience to tears, you had to prioritize human speech.
Yeah.
They were intellectuals, poets, and musicians who basically decided to strip away centuries of complex polyphony. They created an experience where a single, highly expressive vocal line carries the entire emotional weight of the story.
Supported by just a really sparse, simple chordal accompaniment, right?
Yes. They allow the natural, irregular rhythm of spoken Italian to dictate the rhythm of the music. And we call this single, clear, melodic line monody.
Monody. One voice. But, I mean, people had sung solos before. Why was this such an earth-shattering innovation?
Well, it was the structural hierarchy it created. Before, all voices were equal. Monody created a dictatorship of the melody.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the accompaniment existed solely to serve the soloist. This expressive, speech-like singing where the singer might speed up or slow down to emphasize a tragic word was called stile representativo, or representative style.
And the Camerata even published a collection of this, boldly titled Le Nouveau Musique, which translates to the new music.
I love the sheer arrogance of that.
Yeah.
Here is the new music, everyone. Throw out your old scores.
It's so bold. And this single shift, putting the text first, culminates in Claudio Monteverdi writing L'Orfeo.
Oh, Monteverdi weaponized monody. L'Orfeo wasn't just a collection of songs. It was a full-scale, dramatic production sung from beginning to end, which essentially invented opera as we know it today.
And to pull this off, you needed a compelling text,
Right.
right? Which we call the libretto.
Right, the libretto. And because this music was so naked, so emotionally demanding, it required vocalists of terrifying skill and lung power.
Which brings us back to those castrato singers I mentioned earlier. Men castrated before puberty to preserve their high vocal range.
It's just wild to think about.
It is. They combined the lung capacity of a grown man with the soaring register of a soprano. It's this intense, brutal reflection of how badly audiences wanted to be thrilled.
Truly.
But that introduces a huge mechanical problem for the composers. Like, once you have this incredible solo voice telling a story, how do you actually pace a 3-hour drama?
Well, you can't just have someone screaming at peak emotional intensity for 3 hours.
Yeah.
The human brain numbs to it.
Right, you just tune out.
Exactly. A good drama requires a mechanism to drive the plot forward quickly, and a separate mechanism to let the audience process the emotional fallout.
Let's look at Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas, which was written a bit later in England. When you listen to the music, there's a jarring shift in how time operates.
Oh, yes.
1 minute, the characters are practically speed-talking in musical pitches, ripping through the dialogue to get the plot moving.
And then a tragedy occurs. The action entirely freezes, and a character pours their heart out over a single, deep emotion.
So that structural contrast is the engine of Baroque opera, right?
It is. The fast, speech-like storytelling mechanism is called recitativo secco, or dry recitative. It's mostly just the voice and a few plucked chords to keep them in key.
But when time stops for that deep emotional reflection, you are in the aria.
Yes. The aria isn't about plot. It's about pure psychological exploration.
But wait, if Dido is heartbroken, why does she just sing about being sad for 5 straight minutes? Wouldn't a modern audience expect some nuance? Like, maybe she's sad, but also a little angry, and maybe a bit hopeful.
Well, the Baroque mind didn't view psychology that way. They operated under a philosophy called the doctrine of the affections.
Okay, the doctrine of the affection.
They believed that music was a physical force that could literally alter your bodily humors. If you introduce too many conflicting emotions into a single area, like sadness, anger, joy, you would physically confuse the listener's body.
Seriously?
Yes. To truly move someone, a piece of music had to focus intensely on one single affection and drill it into the audience's soul without mercy.
So if it's a sad area, you just hammer home the sadness until there isn't a dry eye in the house.
Precisely.
And Purcell does this mechanically in Dido's famous lament at the end of the opera. Before she even opens her mouth to sing, the instruments start playing this descending, repeating bass line. It just cycles over and over, pulling you downward.
That repeating anchor is called a ground bass. And mechanically, it is a brilliant trap.
A trap.
Yeah, because the bass line dictates the harmony, because it keeps repeating its downward descent. No matter what beautiful, soaring melody Dido sings above it, she is eventually dragged back down by the bass.
Wow, so it forces these painful, clashing dissonances between her voice and the accompaniment.
Exactly. The ground bass physically restricts the music, just as Dido feels hopelessly trapped by her tragic fate.
It is incredibly heavy. Okay, so secular theater has figured out how to use monody, arias, and the ground bass to manipulate human emotion.
Right.
But you can't keep a weapon like that contained. The church looks at this and realizes they need to harness this exact same dramatic power, or they are going to lose their audience.
The religious institutions had a major problem. They needed to convey complex theological arguments to congregations, but they couldn't just have, an operatic diva acting out Bible scenes.
So it wouldn't fly on a Sunday morning.
Definitely not. So they asked a different question: how do we take the drama of opera and apply it to a deeply complex theological conversation? And in the Lutheran Church in Germany, the ultimate answer to that question was Johann Sebastian Bach.
We really cannot do a deep dive on the Baroque without Bach. But Bach wasn't writing flashy Italian operas.
Oh, not at all.
You look at a required study piece like his cantata number 80, "A mighty fortress is our God." The experience here is wild. He takes a melody that every single person in the congregation already knew, a basic familiar church hymn,
Right.
and he uses it as the foundational scaffolding to build a massive, multi-layered, terrifyingly complex musical skyscraper.
And that familiar hymn tune at the core of the piece is called a chorale, specifically a Lutheran chorale.
Okay.
And the massive structure Bach builds around it using a chorus, soloists, and an orchestra is the cantata.
So Bach literally took the operatic tools we just talked about, like the recitative and the aria, and grafted them onto the church service.
He did. His job was to take the theological message of the week and bring it to life musically.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the way Bach handles multiple voices is nothing like the Florentine Camerata.
No, it's a completely different philosophy.
Bach doesn't want just one voice. He wants multiple independent voices. But unlike Renaissance polyphony, his voices are engaged in a hyperlogical, mathematical chase.
You're touching on the essence of counterpoint. When one voice introduces a melody and then another voice enters with that exact same melody, strictly chasing the first one. That's a canon.
Like singing row, row, row your boat in a round.
The simplest modern example, yeah.
Right, but Bach's counterpoint isn't a simple campfire song. When you get to a fugue, it feels less like a song and more like a brilliantly moderated debate. Or even better, a game of musical chess.
Oh, definitely.
Each voice introduces a subject, but then they adapt, they change keys, they flip upside down, they stretch out.
Bach is arguably history's greatest contrapuntist. In a fugue, he could take a single musical idea and weave 4 or 5 entirely independent lines of logic around it.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
Mechanically, it is astounding. If you alter one note in the tenor line, you risk destroying the harmonic math of the soprano line.
Wow.
Yet despite this rigorous architectural blueprint he forces himself to follow, the resulting sound isn't cold math. It is overwhelmingly emotional. He achieves mathematical perfection and poetry simultaneously.
So we've seen how Bach takes dramatic vocal lines and forces them into this intense, logical church debate. But what happens when we strip the words away entirely?
Well, that's when things get really fast.
Right. Like what happens when you apply that same conversational debate to pure instrumental music?
You get some of the most kinetic, adrenaline-fueled music of the era. To understand this, we have to look at Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 2.
The auditory experience of this piece is thrilling. You have a small, nimble group of soloists, a trumpet, a recorder, an oboe, and a violin.
Right.
And they're squaring off against a much larger, powerful string orchestra. It feels like a musical David and Goliath. The small group is darting around, and the large group is trying to crush them with sheer volume.
This format, deliberately pitting a small, virtuosic group against a massive supporting group, is called the Concerto Grosso.
Okay, Concerto Grosso.
The small group of soloists is the concertino, and the larger orchestra is the ripieno. The composers were basically playing with acoustics. The contrast between the two creates a physical sense of depth, like looking at a painting with a clearly defined foreground and background.
But wait, if you just have these soloists wildly showing off and the orchestra sporadically blasting away, wouldn't it just devolve into chaotic noise? Like, how does the listener keep track of what's happening without any lyrics to guide them?
That is the crucial mechanical problem of instrumental music. Without words, the listener gets lost in the weeds.
Yeah, it's just a wall of notes.
The solution was to create a catchy, robust musical theme, played by the full ripieno orchestra. This theme keeps returning throughout the piece, giving the audience a recognizable home base.
And that recurring theme is the ritornello.
Exactly, which translates from Italian as little return.
So the structure, which we call a ritornello form, is basically the orchestra playing the ritornello hook. Then the concertina goes off on a wild, unpredictable tangent, and just when you feel totally lost, the ritornello comes back to save you.
Yes, exactly that.
Is that basically the Baroque equivalent of a modern pop song's chorus? Like a familiar home base that creates unity amidst the variety of the solo verses?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychological mechanism is identical.
Really?
Yeah. Human beings crave a balance between the unexpected and the familiar. The virtuosic solo sections provide the exciting, unpredictable variety. It keeps our brain engaged.
Right.
But if that's all there is, it becomes exhausting. The ritornello provides the comforting unity. It assures the listener that no matter how wild the debate gets, there is an underlying unifying order to the universe.
I love that. Okay, so we've had the theatrical tragedy of Italy and the heavy mathematical German debates of Bach. Now we need to pack our bags and move to a completely different acoustic environment, the refined, intimate, and highly intellectual world of the French court.
Ah, the French Baroque is a universe unto itself. They actively resisted the heavy Italian drama and the dense German counterpoint.
We're looking at French keyboard music here, specifically the composer Jean-Philippe Rameau. Listeners studying his piece La Poule, which translates to the hen, are looking at a totally different vibe.
A completely different soundscape.
The experience here is elegant, dance-like music played on a plucked keyboard. It's full of these unique fluttering trills, and it literally paints an auditory picture of a clucking, pecking chicken.
It is a masterpiece of musical character painting. Let's layer in the vocabulary here.
Sure.
A collection of these charming dance-like pieces is called a suite, though the French preferred the term ordre.
Ordre, okay.
And that plucked keyboard, which has a very distinct metallic shimmering sound, is the clavecin, which is just the French word for harpsichord.
But the clavecin has a major mechanical limitation compared to a violin or a human voice, right?
It does.
Like once you pluck the string, the sound immediately starts dying away. You can't hold a long emotional note.
Exactly the issue. So how do you make a dying note sound expressive? The French solution was to constantly restrike the string through rapid-fire trills and decorations.
And these are called agréments, right?
Yeah.
Or ornaments.
Yes, but they weren't just pretty decorations. Mechanically, if you rapidly alternate between a main note and a dissonant neighboring note, you are artificially extending the physical tension of the music.
That's so clever.
The agréments were highly calculated tools to manipulate the emotional weight of a chord before it faded away.
And they played these notes with a very specific infectious groove, didn't they?
Yes, that groove comes from a performance practice called notes inégales.
Notes inégales.
Instead of playing a string of notes perfectly evenly, a French clavecinist would play them with an unequal swinging rhythm, long, short, long, short.
So it's remarkably similar to how a modern jazz musician swings eighth notes.
Very similar. It made the music feel incredibly alive and conversational, tailored to the specific mood of the room.
But Rameau wasn't just writing charming, swinging music about farm animals. There's a deeply intellectual scientific side to him. He was asking why music sounds good to the human ear in the first place.
Rameau is the bridge between art and the scientific revolution. He wrote a book in 1722 called the Traité de l'Harmonie, the Treatise on Harmony. And it completely changed how we understand music.
So the same guy writing music that paints a picture of a clucking chicken is also writing the definitive scientific textbook on how harmony works. That is the ultimate Baroque flex.
Dearly is.
How did his science differ from Bach's math?
Well, think of Bach's counterpoint as horizontal. He is weaving 3 or 4 independent horizontal threads of melody from left to right.
Right.
Rameau stopped looking left to right and started looking top to bottom. He realized that if you freeze a piece of music at any given millisecond and you stack all the notes currently being played vertically, you get a chord.
So he shifted the focus entirely from horizontal melodies to vertical chords.
Precisely. He categorized these vertical chords and figured out the mathematical rules for why one chord naturally wants to progress to another. He codified the rules of tonal harmony.
So wait, every time you strum a G chord and move to a C chord on a guitar today, or listen to a 4-chord pop loop, you are essentially operating inside Rameau's scientific framework.
You absolutely are.
Mind-blowing. Okay, we've been in the theater with Monteverdi and Purcell, the church with Bach, and the private French salon with Rameau. Finally, we need to take this musical explosion outdoors.
It's time for some fresh air.
We need to see its public commercial power, which eventually paves the way for the end of the Baroque era entirely.
And this brings us to George Frederick Handel, who was operating in London, treating music very much as a commercial enterprise.
We're looking at Handel's water music. The historical context here is wild. This was written for a literal royal PR stunt, a party on a barge floating down the River Thames for King George Thirst, surrounded by hundreds of other boats.
Yeah, consider the acoustic problem Handel was facing there. You cannot play a delicate French clavecin suite on a boat.
No, the sound would just vanish.
And you cannot play a dense, complex Bach fugue because the intricate counterpoint would turn to absolute mud over the splashing water and the noise of the crowd.
So Handel had to write music that could cut through the noise.
He did.
You listen to the hornpipe movement from this suite, and it is festive, booming, outdoor celebration music. Booming horns, driving strings, crystal clear melodies, and simple foot-stomping dance rhythms.
It was incredibly effective. But this raises an important question. What happens to the evolution of music when audiences start actually preferring that simpler, clearer sound over the complex math of the past? Because that is exactly what happened. Toward the end of the Baroque era, society began to experience a profound fatigue with complexity.
So after decades of having intense emotional affections hammered into them and being forced to track 5 independent voices in a fugue, people just got tired.
Essentially, yes.
They wanted something a bit more breezy and elegant.
The aesthetic pendulum swung violently in the opposite direction. Audiences in the mid-1700s began demanding lighter textures, singable melodies, and a complete rejection of heavy counterpoint.
I mean, that makes sense. You can only handle so much intensity.
Right. And this transition wasn't a sudden stop. It was a gradual commercial and psychological shift. This lighter, more elegant approach became known as the galant style, and in visual arts, the Rococo.
So it was a direct reaction against the heavy intellectual weight of the late Baroque.
And that galant style paved the exact pathway leading directly into the classical era. It set the stage for composers like Mozart and Haydn, who prioritized clarity, balance, and grace over the wild, unchecked experimentation of the Baroque.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground today across your required study works, but if you step back and look at the whole picture, the Baroque era wasn't just a collection of vocabulary words.
Not at all.
It was an era driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desperation to communicate.
And the connections are everywhere. We saw how the Florentine Camerata solved a communication problem by inventing monody.
Right, which allowed Monteverdi and Purcell to explore the depths of human emotion through arias and the crushing weight of the ground bass.
We saw how the church absorbed those dramatic tools, leading Bach to elevate the chorale into massive cantatas and intricate fugues.
We saw how that need for structure bled into instrumental music with the ritornello form in concertos, giving the listener a psychological home base.
Exactly. And we saw how the physical limitations of the French clavecin gave birth to the expressive art of ornamentation, while Rameau simultaneously unlocked the vertical science of chords.
And finally, we saw how the acoustic reality of a river barge required Handel to simplify his sound, inadvertently ushering in the galant style and closing the curtain on the era.
It is a continuous, thrilling story of human beings trying to figure out what sound can actually do to the human body and mind.
And honestly, it makes you wonder about where we are right now. Think about how modern technology, synthesizers, digital production, infinite looping, artificial intelligence is currently disrupting how we manufacture and consume music today.
Oh, absolutely. We're in a massive transitional period ourselves.
We are dealing with new acoustic environments, from giant festival speakers to tiny earbuds. Are we living in a new Baroque era of musical experimentation? The next time you listen to your favorite modern song, try to identify its structural ritornello or the mathematical chord progression mapped out by Rameau, and ask yourself what new, desperate musical questions today's artists are trying to answer.
Because the tools change. But the underlying human desire to be thrilled, to be moved, and to find order in the chaos remains exactly the same.
And suddenly, that dusty museum glass doesn't just look shattered. It looks like a mirror, reflecting our own magnificent, muddy, and totally unpredictable musical future.